as far as the Premier League is concerned, it's cheating. You're gaining an unfair advantage. You're circumnavigating liabilities. You are... Welcome to this week's edition of One to One with Simon Jordan. Don't forget to keep liking and subscribing, and of course, equally as importantly, leaving your questions in the comment section below. But let's get to this week's show. Well, Barcelona have rejigged their finances. The biggest challenge that Barcelona had was that they had a significant debt that they needed to refinance. A lot of the media went about in their usual sensational way saying that Barcelona is in meltdown. What they were doing was restructuring their borrowings. Man United have significant borrowings. They have £400 or £500 million of borrowings, which if you bring that up under Euro terminology is 600 million euros. Barcelona's is slightly bigger, but then again, so are their commercial revenues at times. Now, alongside the restructuring of the debt that they had to do, because the particular debt that they had was being called in by the various lenders, was the fact that La Liga did something quite brave. They did something that a lot of the leagues need to do, is they decided to introduce a salary cap, which was to try and control the cost of football. So with that in mind, it was particularly and specifically aimed at the PSGs, how possibly the Man Cities of the world, and arguably soon to be the Newcastle of the world, to try and get some control over Middle Eastern ownership that doesn't have a great deal of concern about inflation of transfer fees, doesn't have a great deal of concern about inflation of player wages. Now that might sound laughable, given that the original concept of player wages was driven by people like Barcelona and Real Madrid, but Barcelona now find themselves in a restructured position with their debt. They still find themselves in a situation where they're under a salary cap, which, as I said, is good news. And the same token, they obviously have a landscape where they're trying to structure costs in a certain way and move players in and out. So, do I think Barcelona and in this instance, for the point of a comparison that I want to make, Real Madrid have been good for football? On the pitch, yeah. Off the pitch, possibly no. But also, there are far worse protagonists in that space. They've restructured. They'll move Frankie de Jong out, and they will continue to trade and balance their books and find a mechanism to be able to meet their obligations for players that have got big wages currently that they're moving out the door, for the restructuring costs, for the obligations they have to La Liga to get their salary costs under control. So no, I don't think they're a bad thing for football any more than some of the other entities that trade in a certain way. So I think with the signing potentially of Rafinha, who wants to go there, which shows you the pull and luster of these Spanish clubs still, which always disappoints me, because despite the fact Real Madrid keep winning the Champions League, I still think the biggest clubs in world football in our league, in the Premier League. So no, I don't think Barcelona and their restructuring and their refinancing and their jigging about to try and find deals that make sense, which may look like they shouldn't be able to do, but actually are, is necessarily a bad thing. I think there are far worse things than Barcelona trying to horse trade their way through deals. I can understand why Derek Chisora would want to fight Deontay Wilder, because it's going to get a pay-per-view audience. It's going to get Derek paid. If you look at the fight on Saturday evening, the first thing he did after the fight was call Eddie Hearn out about wanting to see more money. Apparently he has kids in private school and needs more money from these fights. I don't think he's probably short of a bob or two, but he wants to get bigger paydays because he knows that boxing is paying a lot of money, and he knows that there are fights out there that potentially can get him paid money. Now, fighting Kubrat Pulev, a fellow 40-year-old, or slightly older than Derek, in all fairness to him, and moving into Deontay Wilder, depending what's left of Deontay Wilder, because I think there's a carcass left of Deontay Wilder after Tyson Fury is finished with him, but it will get him paid. Should he take that fight? Well, if he wants to get paid, he absolutely should. If Deontay Wilder is at peak abilities again, it's a dangerous fight because he's a concussive puncher, but so have a lot of the fighters that Derek's been in with. And if he wants to take that fight, and people want to watch that fight, which they will, where it leads, I don't know. Why Wilder would want that fight, I don't know. It's the first fight last weekend, or the weekend on Saturday, that Derek's won in the last 3 years by his own admission. So from a financial point of view, yes. From a competitivity point of view, depends what Deontay Wilder you get. From a viewing point of view, possibly. So I wouldn't blame Derek for taking it. For a damage, it could be one fight too far. But Wilder technically isn't brilliant. I mean, you've got Chisora going in against Alexander Usyk, who technically is now arguably one of the best fighters in the world, and Derek held his own. He didn't get damaged, albeit he's not the same sort of power Usyk has that Deontay Wilder has. So I'm for Derek getting paid. I'm for him getting the last hurrahs. The Wilder-Chisora fight has a sort of a passing interest for me, but then Derek will say, you say that about all my bloody fights. So I think actually, if Derek Chisora wants to fight and they can make that fight, why not? Well, I mean, look, there's been lots of arguments and debates about the Premier League clubs and their VAT obligations, the way that they've paid agents, the way that they've booked certain transactions for player wages with overseas deals that have paid players through certain structures where their image rights have been restructured in a certain way that's avoided certain obligations that the Premier League Football Club may or may not have. Many years ago when I was at Palace, I was offered a deal to be able to sign players where a percentage of their wages were paid through the payroll, a percentage was paid for a holding company which held the image rights, which effectively saved me 14% on national insurance contributions. So there's two things. There is the sanction of the law of the land, which is ultimately if you're avoiding paying liabilities, whatever they may be, if they're VAT, if they're corporation tax, if they are national insurance contributions on a player's contract, then you should have your minds concentrated both legally and literally. As far as the Premier League is concerned, it's cheating. You're gaining an unfair advantage. You're circumnavigating liabilities. You are finding a mechanism to perhaps find your way around financial fair play because you're not triggering inherent costs that would go towards the bottom line of your business, which would then put you in breach or in line with financial fair play. So if Premier League clubs are doing that, then they should be sanctioned by the Premier League, but also the Premier League should come down very hard because this is massive brand infringement. The Premier League is a huge brand. The last thing it needs is a clown college of football clubs running around trying to nick a few quid out of transactions by not meeting their obligations through tax. Now, whatever those tax triggers are, these businesses are not in size, but in value and reputation. They're blue chip businesses under a blue chip brand, and you can't have businesses running around ducking their tax. It's not like, let's say one of the coffee companies that are based in America or structuring their deals so that the tax liabilities for their corporation tax is spread around countries that have less corporation tax. These are British-based businesses that are British-based institutions, and that means they have to play properly within the confines of legality and the football world. Look, I mean, I know various people that have met Todd Boehly. They think he's a very charming and nice man. Now, some of those are football agents, and they probably think he's a very charming and nice man because he's about to line their pockets. But the bottom line is he's bought a football club for a hell of a lot of money. Nobody, by the way, a lot of that has been private equity money. So the interesting outcome will be what they want a return on their money for, because no one's talked about that. No one's actually talked about what's he bought it for and where the actual money's come from, because a significant proportion of it is private equity, and what return they expect upon it, because Roman Abramovich didn't really expect a return and didn't really buy it for a return. So there'll be some clear blue sky thinking required about what Chelsea are going to be doing. What's he doing at this moment in time? Well, he's looking at a business that has been run a certain way, and perhaps he wants to run it a different way. Now, when I bought Palace, you have a natural situation where you look at what's there and say, does it look, after I've looked at the business and seen it for myself and made some evaluations and taken all the football nonsense, don't do it this way, we do it that way, sort of ideals, and actually work out that actually there's a right way of doing things and a wrong way of doing things, and a lot of the time in football there's some very bad practices. If he's looked at that and thought, right, some of that's dead wood, wheat and chaff, and some of that needs to be moved out of the way in order for me to get my understanding of the business. Some of the core propositions is what I buy players for. That's my biggest expenditure. So I want to make sure that I understand what's going on there before I delegate. So I don't think people departing, Bruce Buck and Mourinho and whoever else is going, and Peter Cech are problems. I think they are solutions to perhaps a revitalised, rebranded Chelsea. I don't mean rebranded in kit and badge. I mean rebranded in the way that they are thinking about business and the way they're going to go forward. So I think Todd Boehly, primarily is getting to grips with a very costly business. No one's bought a football club for anything vaguely resembling this kind of dough. So I think he should be making sure that the best in class is where he wants it to be. He understands the dynamics of what he's doing because he's got a lot of people's money in this business. No, is the answer. They're not going to challenge Man City and Liverpool because they're not at that level. Unless Man City and Liverpool drop their levels. If Man City and Liverpool inexplicably decide, or Erling Haaland is nowhere near the mark that people think he's going to be, which is unlikely, and the loss of Mane at Liverpool is going to massively deplete Liverpool, which I don't think it will do with the advent of Diaz and Núñez in Liverpool. I think you're going to see a little bit more of the same, but what I think you're going to see with Tottenham is a very different Tottenham Hotspur. More substance, more backbone. The players that are coming in are more of a Conte type than that's been there previously. He's made his mind up about certain players, and certain players have left. The boy Bergwijn's gone out, back to the Dutch league, I think. A few others are going to go out. You're seeing players coming in that are more reflective of Conte. So I think Tottenham will finish in the top four, will stabilise in the top four, unless the wheels come off completely with Conte and Daniel Levy, which I have no reason to believe, and sort of contradicts what I've said earlier on about the nature of their relationship. But nevertheless, combustible characters in different ways. But I think Tottenham will stabilise inside the top four, and I wouldn't be surprised if they got themselves in a situation where maybe they got knocked out early in the Champions League and dropped into the Europa League and won that. But I think there's a pot, I think there's a cup for Tottenham next year. Phenomenal tennis player, absolutely phenomenal tennis player. One of the best, if not the best, returners of serve on the backhand wing. Just a player of absolute fortitude, slightly diminishing, but diminishing at a rate that still enables him to be number one in the world. If you look at the final yesterday against Kyrgios, big boy stuff. You know, Kyrgios comes out swinging, but Djokovic isn't Tsitsipas. He doesn't fold under the endless chundering and moaning and groaning and disruption from Kyrgios. He just doubles down and puts more and more pressure. He did it to Yannick Sinner in the quarters, I think, at Wimbledon, where he was 2-0 down and just ground the result out and ground it out and suddenly turns the screw. He is a phenomenal player. It's unarguable. 21 Grand Slams. The difficulty is, you know, potentially can't play in the US Open, potentially can't play in the Australian Open because of the deportation issue. Is he going to win another slam that starts to make the argument that people want to have, which is the greatest of all time, because Nadal's got 22 slams and he's now got 21. But for sheer, unadulterated willpower, quality, determination, resolution, you know, absolute backbone and substance on a tennis court, it's difficult to argue against Djokovic. My favourite has always been McEnroe, but of the modern era, albeit McEnroe was part of the modern era, but of the last 20 years, Federer, you know, with his beautiful play, with his style, and having had time with Federer and watched him in an ambassadorial role, watch him, he's a dream for sponsors. But Djokovic is right there, and you're never going to get a triumvirate of Nadal, Djokovic and Federer again. You've had previous battles with Sampras and Agassi and maybe Roddick, but not at that level, and even Andy Murray on the periphery of it all. But I never like to get into greatest of all time, but my word, Djokovic should be in that conversation, and specifically after this Wimbledon tournament where he hasn't been match sharp, he hasn't played anywhere near as much tennis, but look at the resolve of this man. Look at the fact that when it comes to it, it's in the mind, and my God, has he got a strong mind. He believes his own views in life, you know, he's got the courage of his convictions on certain things, whether you like his views or not. So I think Novak Djokovic is a phenomenon. Right, that's it for this week's edition of One to One with Simon Jordan. Let me know your views on Chelsea, Barcelona and cheating. Don't forget to keep liking and subscribing, and of course leaving those questions in the comment section below, and I'll look forward to seeing you next week.